The millionaire disguised himself as an electrician and discovered what his wife was doing with his mother-in-law. Richard Johnson took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell of his own mansion. The orange uniform from the electric company was tight, the red cap hid part of his face, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the borrowed toolbox. 3 weeks of his wife's strange behavior, unexplained overdue bills, and a growing feeling that something very serious was happening in his home had led him to that desperate decision. When Jennifer opened the door, her eyes passed over him without the slightest sign of recognition. The woman he had lived with for 8 years looked at her disguised husband as if he were a complete stranger. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm from New York Electric. We received a call about a problem with the electrical installation," said Richard, forcing a different accent. "Oh, yes. Please come in," replied Jennifer, opening the door and stepping aside without ceremony. Richard stepped into his own house as if it were the first time. His heart was beating so hard he feared she could hear it. Jennifer was wearing a red dress he had bought for her the previous month, but there was something different about her posture. She seemed tense, constantly looking around. "The problem is with the electrical panel on the lower floor," she explained, guiding him through the living room. It was then that Richard heard the voice that made his blood run cold. "Jennifer, dear, are you sure you can trust this man?" It was the voice of Mrs. Barbara, his 72-year-old mother-in-law. The elderly woman appeared in the room, walking slowly but with attentive eyes fixed on the supposed electrician. Richard lowered his head, pretending to fiddle with the toolbox. "Mom, he's from the electric company. He needs to check that problem you said you smelled something burning," replied Jennifer, with forced patience in her voice. "Good thing you called someone, Mrs. Jennifer," said a third voice. Richard glanced up discreetly and saw Dorothy, the housekeeper who had worked for them for 5 years. The 38-year-old woman was holding some cleaning cloths, but her face showed a concern he had never noticed before. "Dorothy, can you show him where the panel is?" asked Jennifer. "Of course, ma'am. Come with me, sir." "Paul, my name is Paul," Richard replied quickly. As he walked behind Dorothy down the hallway, Richard noticed something that alarmed him. There were empty spaces on the walls where valuable paintings had once hung. The antique sideboard that had been in the family for generations was no longer there. His stomach churned. "Mr. Paul, the electrical panel is here," said Dorothy, pointing to the panel at the end of the hallway. "Thank you, miss. I'll take a look," he replied, opening the toolbox with trembling hands. Richard began pretending to examine the wires, but kept his ears open for any conversation. It didn't take long to hear voices coming from the living room. "Mum, I don't know if we can do this today," Jennifer was saying, her voice low but audible. "Daughter, we have no choice. The men are coming to pick it up at 3 o'clock. If we don't hand it over, it will get worse for both of us," replied Mrs. Barbara. Richard felt the ground fall away beneath his feet. What men? Hand over what? His darkest suspicions were beginning to be confirmed. "But what if Richard comes home early today?" asked Jennifer, and there was genuine fear in her voice. "My dear, your husband didn't even notice we sold the dining room crystal cabinet last week. He's so distracted with those work meetings that he doesn't even notice what's happening in his own home," said Mrs. Barbara, with a coldness that made Richard clench his fists. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "Mrs. Barbara is right, Mrs. Jennifer," said Dorothy, who had approached the two. "But I still think you should talk to Mr. Richard about all this. Dorothy, we've already talked about this. You don't understand the situation," Mrs. Barbara retorted sharply, "and I suggest you keep your mouth shut if you want to keep working here." Richard pretended to be completely focused on the electrical wires, but every word felt like a stab. They were selling household belongings, and Dorothy, the loyal maid, was trying to protect him. "Excuse me, ladies," Richard approached, still maintaining his disguise. "I need to check if the problem isn't also in the main panel there in the kitchen." "Of course, feel free," said Jennifer, but avoided looking directly at him. Walking toward the kitchen, Richard passed through the living room and confirmed his worst fears. The old leather sofa that belonged to his family had disappeared. In its place was an ordinary, much cheaper sofa. The marble coffee table was also gone. In the kitchen, he pretended to examine another electrical panel while listening to the conversation continue. "Jennifer, stop being so scared. We've already sold so many things, and he hasn't even noticed," Mrs. Barbara was saying. "Today it's just one more stereo and those 2 armchairs from the TV room. But Mother, what if someone says something to him? What if the neighbors see the men carrying out the furniture? No one will see anything. You said yourself he doesn't return until after 6. The men arrive at 3 and leave by 4 at the latest." Richard looked at his watch. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. In less than an hour, more of his household belongings would be taken away, and he still didn't know the reason for all this. "Mr. Paul?" Dorothy appeared in the kitchen. "Would you like a glass of water?" "Yes, I'll have one. Thank you," he replied, noticing that the maid seemed to want to talk privately. Dorothy filled a glass with water and approached him. Lowering her voice, she said, "Sir, I don't know if it's my place to say this, but the ladies have been doing some things that, well, aren't quite right." Richard pretended to be surprised, but maintained his disguise. "What do you mean, miss?" "They're selling the house's belongings behind the boss's back. It's been going on for about 2 weeks now." "Wow, that's a complicated situation," said Richard, trying to sound like just a curious electrician. "Yes, it is. I tried to talk to Mrs. Jennifer, but she gets very nervous, and Mrs. Barbara, well, she can be a bit difficult at times." Before Richard could ask anything more, Mrs. Barbara appeared in the kitchen. "Dorothy, what are you doing here? Don't you have work to do?" "I was just offering water to the electrician, Mrs. Barbara. Then get back to your duties. And you, sir, have you finished checking what you needed?" Richard noticed the disguised hostility in his mother-in-law's voice. She was clearly bothered by his presence there. "Not yet, Ma'am. I need to test some connections. It'll take about 40 more minutes." Mrs. Barbara was visibly upset. 40 minutes? Can't it be faster?" "Unfortunately not, Ma'am. It's for safety. If it's not done right, it could short-circuit and cause a fire." The mention of fire made Mrs. Barbara back off. Richard had learned over the years that his mother-in-law had a terrible fear of fire. "All right, but try not to get in the way of our activities here at home," she said, leaving the kitchen. Richard returned to the hallway, pretending to work on the electrical panel but positioned to overhear conversations. 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. "That must be them," said Mrs. Barbara. Richard heard footsteps heading toward the front door. His heart raced. In just a few moments he would see with his own eyes who the buyers of his house's furniture were. "Good afternoon, ladies. We've come to pick up the items," said an unfamiliar male voice. "Please come in," replied Jennifer. Richard leaned against the wall, trying to see without being seen. 2 middle-aged men, casually dressed, entered the house. They didn't look like criminals, just ordinary people. "The armchairs are right here," said Mrs. Barbara, pointing to the TV room, "and the sound system is over there." "Perfect. These are exactly the pieces our client was looking for," said one of the men. As the men examined the furniture, Richard noticed Jennifer pacing nervously around the room. She seemed to be struggling with some inner conflict. "Payment is in cash as agreed," said the second man, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "Yes, thank you," replied Mrs. Barbara, quickly taking the money. Richard saw his mother-in-law count the bills with an expression of relief that left him even more confused. Why did she need that money so badly? "Mom," Jennifer said softly, "are you sure this is really what we should do?" "We've already talked about this, dear. We have no choice," Mrs. Barbara replied, putting the money in her purse. The men began loading the armchairs. Richard watched his home being taken apart piece by piece, and the pain in his chest was almost unbearable. But he needed to understand the reason behind all this before taking action. "All set, ladies, everything's loaded," said one of the men. "If you need to sell anything else, you know how to reach us." "Thank you," said Mrs. Barbara. "Maybe next week we'll have a few more pieces." More pieces. Richard felt a wave of panic. How far would this go? After the men left, the house fell silent for a few minutes. Richard continued pretending to work, waiting for the conversation to resume. "There, it's done," said Jennifer with a weary sigh. "Now we can breathe a little easier," replied Mrs. Barbara. "For how long, Mom? How long can we keep doing this without him finding out?" "Jennifer, stop with the drama. Your husband has so much money, he won't even miss these things." Richard clenched his fists. How could his mother-in-law talk about him like that? But Mom, this isn't right. These are his things, our home's things. What if he finds out? He won't find out if you don't keep looking so guilty all the time, said Mrs. Barbara impatiently. Besides, dear, you're saving your own mother. Or would you rather see me struggle? Richard noticed the manipulative tone in his mother-in-law's voice. She was using emotional blackmail on her own daughter. It's not that, Mum. I just think we could talk to Richard, explain the situation. Explain what, Jennifer? That your mother got into a tricky situation, that I need money urgently to sort out some problems. Do you think he'll understand? Problems? What kind of problems? Richard forced himself to keep pretending to work, but every fibre of his being wanted to burst into the room and demand explanations. Mr. Paul, Dorothy appeared beside him again. How's the work going? Fine, miss. Just about 15 more minutes. Dorothy looked around and lowered her voice. Sir, can I trust you? Richard stared at her, seeing the sincerity in the maid's eyes. Of course. What is it? It's just... Well, I've worked in this house for 5 years. I know the boss and the missus well and what's happening, and it's not normal. What do you mean? Mrs. Jennifer is a good person, sir, but her mother, Mrs. Barbara, she kind of bosses her daughter around, you know. And lately she's been putting a lot of pressure on Mrs. Jennifer to get money. Richard pretended to be surprised. Money for what? Dorothy hesitated, looking around again. I shouldn't say this, but I think Mrs. Barbara has some financial problems. Some debts, maybe. What kind of debts? I'm not sure, but I've seen some different men here at the house a few times. Men who didn't seem to be family friends, if you know what I mean. Richard felt a chill down his spine. Debt collectors, loan sharks? And Mrs. Jennifer, how is she handling this? Very badly, sir. She cries in secret, gets nervous all the time. I feel sorry for her, truly. I think she got herself into a situation she doesn't know how to fix. Why doesn't she talk to her husband? Dorothy sighed. Because Mrs. Barbara won't let her. She convinced Mrs. Jennifer that the boss won't understand, that he'll get angry, that he might even leave her because of her mother-in-law's problems. Richard could hardly believe what he was hearing. His mother-in-law was manipulating his wife and using him as a phantom threat. It's a very complicated situation, he said, trying to stay calm. It really is. And I'm stuck in the middle, not knowing what to do. I can't disrespect the bosses, but I also see that this isn't going to work out. Before Richard could ask anything else, he heard Mrs. Barbara's voice calling, Dorothy, where are you? I have to go, sir. But if you ever meet the boss of this house, maybe you could, I don't know, find a way to warn him about what's happening here. Richard looked into Dorothy's eyes and saw genuine sincerity and concern. I'll think about what I can do, he said. Dorothy walked away, and Richard went back to pretending he was working, but his mind was racing. Now he knew that Jennifer wasn't the villain of the story. She was being manipulated by her own mother. 15 minutes later, Richard put his tools back in the box and headed to the living room. All done, ladies. The problem was exactly where I thought. Everything's fixed. That's good, said Jennifer, seeming relieved that he was leaving. How much do we owe? Asked Mrs. Barbara. Don't worry, Ma'am, it was just a small issue, no charge. Richard saw the surprised expressions on both women's faces. Are you sure? Asked Jennifer. Yes, I am. It was quick to fix. Actually, Richard didn't want to take money from his own house, especially not after learning that this money might be coming from selling his belongings. Thank you very much, then, said Jennifer, walking him to the door. You're welcome, ma'am, and if you need anything, you can call the company. Richard left the house with a broken heart, but also with a clarity he didn't have before. Jennifer wasn't his enemy. She was being victimized by her own mother. The whole way to the office, he thought about what he had witnessed. Mrs. Barbara obviously had serious debts, possibly with dangerous people. She was using her daughter to get money, selling Richard's household belongings. But what bothered him most was the psychological manipulation. The way Mrs. Barbara had turned Jennifer into a frightened, guilty person, unable to trust her own husband. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, Please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night, Richard came home as usual, at 6:30. Jennifer greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, but he noticed she avoided looking directly into his eyes. "How was your day, honey?" she asked with forced cheerfulness in her voice. "Normal. And yours?" "Quiet." "We stayed home, Mum and I. Oh, and an electrician came this morning. There was a small problem with the electrical panel." Richard pretended to be interested. "Really? You didn't tell me we had an electrical problem." "It was something Mum noticed yesterday. A strange smell. But it's already fixed." Richard watched his wife as she spoke. Jennifer was clearly nervous, constantly fidgeting with her hands, avoiding eye contact. "I'm glad you worked it out," he said. "Where is Mrs. Barbara?" "She went to rest a bit, said she was tired." During dinner, Richard observed the dynamic between his wife and his mother-in-law closely. Mrs. Barbara controlled the entire conversation, made subtly critical comments about Jennifer, and constantly changed the subject when he tried to ask about their day. "Richard, dear," said Mrs. Barbara, "don't you think you've been working too much lately?" "Why do you ask, Mrs. Barbara?" "It's just that you leave so early and come back so late. You hardly have time to notice what's happening at home." Richard felt a chill. She was testing whether he had noticed the changes in the house. "It's true that I've been quite busy," he replied, deciding to play her game. "But I always pay attention to my home." He saw Jennifer swallow hard. Of course," said Mrs. Barbara quickly. "I just meant that you should relax more, enjoy your family more." After dinner, Richard locked himself in the office, pretending to work, but actually planning his next move. He needed more information about Mrs. Barbara's debts, and most importantly, he needed to find a way to protect Jennifer without putting her in an even worse situation. Around 10 at night, he heard soft voices coming from the living room. He discreetly left the office and positioned himself where he could hear without being seen. "Daughter, tomorrow we need to settle the matter of the dining room table," Mrs. Barbara was saying. "Mum, that table is very noticeable. Richard will notice it's gone." "Jennifer, you always make excuses. We'll say we sent it for polishing, that it's at the woodwork shop. And if he wants to call to confirm? For heaven's sake, Jennifer, you've been married to this man for 8 years. Can't you come up with a simple excuse?" Richard clenched his fists. The way Mrs. Barbara spoke to Jennifer was disrespectful and manipulative. "It's not about making excuses, Mum. It's just that this is making me feel really bad. I can't sleep properly. I can't look Richard in the face. Daughter, would you rather see your mother in a difficult situation with dangerous people?" Dangerous people? Richard knew his suspicions were right. "Of course not, Mom, but—" "No buts, Jennifer. You're my daughter. It's your duty to help me when I need it." "I know, Mom. It's just that—" "It's just that what? You prefer your millionaire husband over your own mother?" Richard could hear the emotional blackmail in every word Mrs. Barbara said. "It's not that, Mom. It would never be that." "Then stop making trouble. Tomorrow we sell the table and a few more small pieces. After that, maybe we can go a while without touching anything else." "Are you sure?" "I am, daughter. Just a little more, and everything will work out." Richard went back to the office but couldn't concentrate on anything else. With every word he heard, it became clearer that Jennifer was the victim of severe psychological manipulation. The next morning, he left for work as usual, but at 9 o'clock he called home. Dorothy answered. "Dorothy, it's Richard. Is Jennifer there?" "Mr. Richard, good morning." Mrs. Jennifer went out with Mrs. Barbara. They said they'd be back for lunch. "Where did they go?" Dorothy hesitated. "I'm not sure, sir, but they left in a bit of a hurry." Richard understood. They had gone out to sell more items from the house. "Dorothy, can I trust you?" "Of course, Mr. Richard. You know you can. I need you to tell me everything you know about what's happening at home." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Sir, I don't know if it's my place. Dorothy, please. I'm noticing something is wrong, but I need to understand what's going on so I can help." The housekeeper sighed. "Mr. Richard, Mrs. Barbara is making Mrs. Jennifer sell things from the house." "I suspected that. What for?" "From what I understand, Mrs. Barbara has some debts, and some men have shown up here a few times to collect from her. What kind of men? Men who are kind of tough, you know, Mr. Richard. They didn't seem to be from the bank or anything like that. Loan sharks. Richard was certain now. And Jennifer? Mrs. Jennifer is suffering a lot, Mr. Richard. She cries in secret, gets nervous all the time. I think she's afraid to tell you. Afraid of me? Mrs. Barbara convinced her that you wouldn't understand, that you might even leave her because of her mother-in-law's problems. Richard felt a huge anger toward his mother-in-law, but also a deep sadness for Jennifer. Dorothy, can you do me a favor? Of course, Mr. Richard. Write down all the items they sold and when they sold them, and if you can, try to find out who they sold them to. I already know about some things, Mr. Richard. I can make a list. Great. And Dorothy, for now, don't mention to them that we talked, okay? Understood, Mr. Richard. Richard hung up the phone and kept thinking. He needed to find out more about Mrs. Barbara's debts before confronting the situation. If they were really loan sharks, things could be more dangerous than he imagined. During the afternoon, he cancelled all his meetings and left the office early. But instead of going home, he went to his lawyer's office, Attorney Michael Brown. Richard, what a surprise, said Michael, greeting his friend. What brings you here? Michael, I need your help with a delicate situation. Richard told the whole story to the lawyer, from his suspicions to what he had discovered by disguising himself as an electrician. My God, Richard, what a complicated situation, said Michael. Are you sure they're loan sharks? Not absolutely, but all the signs point to it. And your wife is being emotionally blackmailed by her own mother. Exactly. And I don't know how to solve this without putting Jennifer in an even worse situation. Michael was thoughtful for a few minutes. Richard, first we need to find out exactly who your mother-in-law owes and how much. Then we can think of a strategy to resolve both the debts and the family issue. How do we do that? I have a private investigator who can help us. Discreetly, of course. Could it be dangerous? If they're really loan sharks, there's always a risk. But knowing the full situation, we can prepare better. Richard agreed. They scheduled for the investigator to start the work the next day. When Richard got home that night, he found Jennifer even more nervous than the day before. She could barely hold a normal conversation. Honey, are you okay? He asked. I'm fine. Why do you ask? You seem tense, worried about something. Jennifer avoided looking at him. It's nothing. Just a little tired. During dinner, Richard noticed that the dining room table had really disappeared. In its place was a much simpler and cheaper table. What happened to our dining table? He asked, pretending to have just noticed it then. Jennifer turned pale. Mrs. Barbara answered quickly. We sent it for restoration, son-in-law. It had some ugly scratches. It'll be ready next week. Where did you leave it? At a woodworking shop in the neighborhood, replied Mrs. Barbara without hesitation. Which woodworking shop? Maybe I know it. Richard saw Jennifer swallow hard. Oh, it's a small one. I don't know if you'd know it, said Mrs. Barbara. Jennifer remembers the name, don't you, dear? Yes, St. Joseph's Woodwork, answered Jennifer in a trembling voice. Richard made a mental note of the name. It was probably a lie, but it would be worth checking. After dinner, he locked himself in his office again, but actually kept an eye on the activity in the house. Around 9 o'clock, he heard Mrs. Barbara making a phone call. Hello? Is this Victor? It's Barbara. Yes. I got another part of the money today. No, it's not everything yet, but it's a good amount. Can I bring it tomorrow morning? I see. Okay, noon then. At the usual spot. Thank you. Richard felt his heart race. Victor must be the loan shark. And from the tone of the conversation, Mrs. Barbara still owed a considerable amount. The next morning, Richard left for work, but kept watching the house from a distance. At 11:30, he saw Mrs. Barbara leave alone, carrying a bag. He discreetly followed her to a downtown bar. He saw when she met with a middle-aged man, handed him an envelope, and they talked for about 10 minutes. The man didn't seem violent, but there was something in his posture that indicated he wasn't someone to be messed with. Richard took some discreet photos with his cell phone and sent them to attorney Michael Brown. When he returned home for lunch, he found Jennifer even more upset. "Honey, we need to talk," he said, pulling her into the office. "About what?" she asked, clearly nervous. "About what's happening in this house." Jennifer turned pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Jennifer, please, we've been married for 8 years. Do you think I don't notice when something's wrong?" "Richard, Honey, I know furniture is disappearing from the house. I know your mother is having financial problems, and I know you're suffering because of all this." Jennifer started to cry. "How do you know?" "Because I pay attention to my home and my wife. The question is, why didn't you trust me?" Because Mom said you wouldn't understand, that you might even want to leave me." Richard felt a mix of anger and sadness. "Jennifer, in 8 years of marriage, have I ever given you any reason to think I'm that kind of person?" "No, never. But Mom said rich men always abandon their wives when they become a problem." "And you believe your mother more than me," Jennifer sobbed. "It's not that, Richard. It's just, she's my mother, and she's in a very difficult situation." "What kind of situation?" Jennifer hesitated. She owes money to some people." "What kind of people?" "People who aren't very patient about getting paid back." "Loan sharks?" Jennifer nodded, crying even more. "Why did she get involved with loan sharks?" She started gambling after Dad passed away. She said it was to not feel alone, but she kept betting higher and higher, and before she knew it, she owed a lot of money." Richard hugged his wife, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that she was finally telling the truth, sadness for the situation they were in. "Jennifer, why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was ashamed, and because Mom convinced me that you wouldn't want to get involved with her problems." "Honey, we're a family. One person's problems are everyone's problems." Jennifer cried even more. You're not mad at me. I'm sad that you didn't trust me, but I'm not mad. I'm worried." "Richard, how much money does she owe?" "I don't know yet, but we'll find out and solve this together." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That afternoon, Richard received a call from attorney Michael Brown. "Richard, my investigator found out some things about your mother-in-law." "What did he find out?" "She owes approximately $300,000 to a loan shark named Victor Martinez. She started owing $50,000, but with the interest, the debt tripled in 6 months. Richard felt his stomach churn. $300,000. Yes, and from what we could gather, this Victor isn't a violent person, but he's also not someone who accepts not getting his money back. What happens if she doesn't pay? Usually he increases the pressure. He might start showing up at the house, calling constantly, causing public scenes. And what if she still can't pay? Then things could get more complicated. He could pass the debt on to less patient people." Richard took a deep breath. "Michael, how much do you think she's managed to get by selling the furniture from my house?" "From what you've told me, maybe about $50,000–$60,000. It's a drop in the ocean compared to what she owes. So this will never solve the problem." "Exactly. In fact, it's just buying time." Richard became thoughtful. "What do you suggest?" "Well, you can pay off this debt without major financial problems, right?" "I can." "Then my suggestion is pay the debt, but impose strict conditions on your mother-in-law. Treatment for gambling addiction, total transparency about her finances, and most importantly, stop the emotional manipulation of your wife." "Do you think she'll accept these conditions? If the alternative is dealing with the loan shark alone, I think she will." That night, Richard called Jennifer and Mrs. Barbara for a serious talk in the living room. "Mrs. Barbara, I need to talk to you about your debts." The mother-in-law turned pale. "What debts?" "Ma'am, please, I already know everything. I know you owe money to loan sharks. I know you're pressuring Jennifer to sell furniture from our house, and I know this will never solve your problem." Mrs. Barbara looked angrily at Jennifer. "You told him everything?" "Mom, I couldn't keep lying anymore." "Mrs. Barbara," Richard continued, You owe $300,000. Even if we sold all the furniture in this house, we wouldn't get even a third of that amount. The mother-in-law collapsed into a chair. How did you find out the amount? That doesn't matter. What matters is resolving the situation. And how do you plan to do that? I'll pay your debt in full. Both Jennifer and Mrs. Barbara were shocked. Richard, you don't have to do this, said Jennifer. Yes, I do, honey. Because if I don't, this situation will drag on indefinitely, and it will destroy our marriage. But $300,000, murmured Mrs. Barbara. Mrs. Barbara, I earn that in 2 months. For me, it's not a financial problem. But I'll pay with conditions. What conditions? First condition, you will get treatment for gambling addiction. I know an excellent clinic, and you will undergo treatment until you're medically discharged. Mrs. Barbara hesitated. I don't know if I need treatment. Second condition, total transparency about your finances. Every week, you'll show me exactly how you spent every penny. Richard, Mrs. Barbara tried to protest. Third condition, you will immediately stop the emotional manipulation of Jennifer. No blackmail, no making my wife feel guilty about your problems. I never manipulated my daughter. Mrs. Barbara, Richard interrupted firmly, I personally heard you emotionally blackmailing Jennifer. I heard you using her filial love to force her into these schemes. The mother-in-law turned red. Fourth condition, if you gamble any amount, no matter how small, the agreement is cancelled, and you'll have to deal with Victor on your own, Mrs. Barbara swallowed hard upon hearing the loan shark's name. How do you know his name? I know many things, Mrs. Barbara. The question is, do you accept my conditions? The mother-in-law looked at Jennifer, who was crying silently. And if I don't accept? Then you'll handle your problems alone. Jennifer and I will move elsewhere, and you'll stay here dealing with your debts. You'd really do that? Richard looked at Jennifer before answering. Mrs. Barbara, I love my wife, but I won't allow her to be psychologically destroyed because of your problems. If you don't accept help, I'll protect my wife the only way I can. Mrs. Barbara fell silent for a few minutes. All right, I accept your conditions. Are you sure? I am. But... Thank you, Richard. I know I don't deserve your help after everything I've done. You're right, you don't. But Jennifer deserves to have peace in her own home. Richard turned to his wife. And you, Jennifer, I need to know if I can trust you from now on. You can, Richard. I'll never hide anything from you again. Not even to protect your mother? Jennifer looked at Mrs. Barbara, then at Richard. Not even to protect my mother. In the following days, Richard arranged everything to pay off Mrs. Barbara's debt. The meeting with Victor was tense, but the loan shark received the money without issues and assured that he considered the matter closed. Mrs. Barbara began treatment at the specialized clinic for gambling addiction. At first she resisted a lot, but gradually she accepted that she really needed help. Jennifer, freed from the burden of secrets and emotional manipulation, began to return to the cheerful and confident woman Richard had known. 3 months after the confrontation, they were having dinner at home when Mrs. Barbara said, Richard, dear, I need to apologize for the past few months. Richard and Jennifer stopped eating. In treatment, I'm learning many things about myself, and one of them is that I really was emotionally manipulating Jennifer. Jennifer held her mother's hand. Mom. No, dear. Let me speak. Richard was right. I used your daughterly love to get what I wanted, and that wasn't right. The important thing is that you're getting treatment, said Richard. I am. And I'm discovering that I started gambling not out of loneliness, but to escape the responsibility of rebuilding my life after your father died. And how are you feeling now? Better, lighter. It's been 3 months since I felt the urge to bet even $1. Richard smiled. That's good, Mrs. Barbara. Richard, can I ask you a question? Of course. Why did you help me? After everything I did, why didn't you abandon me with my problems? Richard thought for a moment. Because you're Jennifer's mother, and because everyone deserves a second chance, as long as they're truly willing to change. Mrs. Barbara began to cry. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. That night, as they were getting ready for bed, Jennifer hugged Richard. "Honey, thank you for saving my family." "I didn't save anything, Jennifer. You saved yourselves." "What do you mean?" "Your mother saved herself by accepting treatment. You saved yourself by deciding to trust me. I just helped in the process." "And if she starts gambling again? Then we'll have to make more difficult decisions. But we'll deal with that if it happens." "Richard." "Yes?" "How did you find out what was happening?" Richard smiled. "I disguised myself as an electrician and came here to the house." "What?" Richard told the whole story of the disguise. Jennifer was stunned. "You were here in the house and I didn't recognize my own husband?" "I was, and that's how I found out everything." "My God, Richard, how did you manage to stay calm?" "I didn't. I was desperate. But I knew I needed to understand the situation before acting. And if you had confronted me that day, you probably would have denied everything. Your mother would have made up some excuse, and the problem would have continued." Jennifer became thoughtful. "You were very smart." "I was desperate, but it worked." 6 months later, the family's life had completely stabilized. Mrs. Barbara had been discharged from treatment but continued attending support meetings for gambling addicts. She had found new healthy hobbies and was genuinely rebuilding her self-esteem. Jennifer had resumed some activities she had abandoned during the crisis period, like her painting classes and meetings with friends. The relationship between her and Richard was stronger than ever. One day Richard came home and found a new dining table in the dining room. "What a beautiful table," he said. "Do you like it?" asked Jennifer, smiling. "I do. But where did you get the money to buy it?" "Mom sold some jewelry she still had stored away. Real jewelry, her own. She wanted to buy it to replace the table we sold." Richard was moved. "And Dorothy? How is she?" "Great. Actually, she told me she wants to talk to you." Dorothy appeared in the room. "Mr. Richard, may I speak with you?" "Of course, Dorothy." "Doctor, I wanted to thank you for resolving that whole situation. I was very worried about Mrs. Jennifer." "You were essential, Dorothy. If it weren't for you, I would never have understood what was really going on. You're not mad at me for not telling you sooner?" "Of course not. You were in a very difficult position. You did what you could to help." "Thank you, Doctor." That evening, Richard was in the office when Jennifer entered. "Honey, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you still think about what happened?" "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because sometimes I feel guilty for doubting you." Richard stood up and hugged his wife. "Jennifer, you didn't doubt me. You were manipulated by someone who was desperate and sick. Those are very different things. But I should have trusted you more. Honey, your mother spent months working on you psychologically, using your filial love, your insecurities, your fears. Anyone could have fallen for that manipulation. You wouldn't have fallen for it. I wasn't in your position. She's not my mother. She couldn't manipulate me in the same way." Jennifer sighed. "Do you think she really changed?" "I think so. But mainly, I think you changed. You learned to set healthy boundaries with her. It was hard. I imagine it must be very difficult to learn to say no to your own mother. But it was necessary. It was. And look at the result. You now have a more honest and healthy relationship than before." The following week, Richard was leaving the office when he received a call from an unknown number. "Hello? Richard? It's Victor." Richard felt a chill down his spine. It was the loan shark. "What do you want?" "Relax, man. It's nothing bad. It's just, well, after you paid Mrs. Barbara's debt, I've been thinking about something." "About what?" "Do you know other people who might be going through the same problem?" "Why do you ask?" "Because I wanted to propose a partnership." Richard was confused. "What kind of partnership?" "Look, I know you might find it strange, but I don't like seeing families destroyed because of debts. If you know people in that situation, maybe we can find a way to help." "How?" "You pay the debts, I stop collecting, and the people get treatment. Everyone wins." Richard was surprised. "Are you serious?" "I am. Look, Richard, I've been working in this for 20 years. I've seen many families destroyed because of gambling debts, and when I saw how you resolved your mother-in-law's situation, I thought maybe we could help other people. It's interesting. Think about the proposal. If you know anyone in that situation, call me. After hanging up, Richard kept thinking about the proposal. It was really unusual, but it made sense. That night, he told Jennifer about the call. "How strange," she said. "I thought so too, but at the same time it makes sense." "How so?" "Jennifer, your mother's situation isn't unique. There must be hundreds of families going through the same problem. And you're thinking about accepting the proposal." "I'm thinking about investigating further. If it's legitimate, it could be a way to help many people." "Would it be like an NGO?" "Something like that. A way to break the vicious cycle of gambling debts." Jennifer became thoughtful. "I think it would be a good way to turn our bad experience into something positive." "I think so too." 2 months later, Richard had created the Fresh Start Institute, a non-profit organization that helped families destroyed by gambling addiction. The institute operated simply. People who had relatives addicted to gambling could seek help. If the situation was legitimate, the institute paid off the debts and offered complete treatment for the addict and psychological support for the family. The first case they handled was that of a lady named Mrs. Margaret, who had lost her home in bets and was living on the street. Her daughter, Amy, had sought out the institute in desperation. "Mr. Richard," said Amy, crying, "my mother wasn't like this. She started gambling after she retired and now she's lost everything." "How much does she owe?" $50,000. It's not much compared to other cases, but for us, it's a fortune." Richard looked at Jennifer, who was present at the meeting. "Amy, we're going to help your mother, but she needs to agree to treatment." "She agrees. She's desperate." Mrs. Margaret's treatment was a success. 6 months later, she was clean from gambling and had gotten a job as an elderly caregiver. "Mr. Richard," she said during a visit to the institute, "thank you for giving me a second chance." "You gave yourself a second chance, Mrs. Margaret. We only helped." In 2 years, the Fresh Start Institute had helped over 100 families. The partnership with Victor had worked well. He referred cases of desperate people, and the institute assessed whether it could help. At a meeting of the institute's board, Richard was presenting the results of the second year. "In the past year, we achieved an 80% success rate in treatments. This means 8 out of 10 people we helped never gambled again." "That's an impressive result," said attorney Michael Brown, who was a board member. "And we managed to help entire families, not just the addict, but spouses, children, parents." "How is the institute's financial situation?" asked another member. "Stable. We have regular donors and some companies that support us." Jennifer, who was also a board member, raised her hand. "Richard, I'd like to propose something." "What is it?" "How about we create a specific program for cases like my mother's, where there's family emotional manipulation?" "Explain further." "Often, the addict manipulates the family to get money. It would be important to have psychologists specialized in that." "Excellent idea. Let's develop that program." After the meeting, Richard and Jennifer walked through the park where they had met 10 years earlier. "Honey, have you ever thought about how our lives have changed since that day I disguised myself as an electrician? I think about it all the time. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't discovered the situation. Probably our family would have been destroyed, and now we're helping other families not to be destroyed." Richard stopped walking and looked at Jennifer. "Do you regret anything? Not trusting you from the start? And you? Not paying more attention to the signs earlier? If I had noticed your mother's problems sooner, maybe she wouldn't have sunk so deep into debt. But maybe she wasn't ready to accept help back then." "That's true." They continued walking in silence for a few minutes. "Richard." "Yes?" "Thank you." "Why?" "For not giving up on our family. For fighting for us." Richard kissed his wife's forehead. "I'm the one who should thank you for allowing me to fight for us." That night, when they arrived home, they found Mrs. Barbara preparing dinner in the kitchen. "How was the institute meeting?" she asked. "Very good, Mom. We approved new projects," replied Jennifer. "What kind of projects?" "A program to help families who've experienced emotional manipulation," said Richard. Mrs. Barbara stopped stirring the food and turned to them. "Did you create this because of what happened to us?" "Not just because of that. But also, Richard replied, we discovered it's very common for families to go through this situation. And now you're going to help other people like me? We're going to help the whole families, not just the addicts. Mrs. Barbara became emotional. Richard, may I give you a hug? Richard was surprised. Mrs. Barbara had never asked to hug him before. Of course, Mrs. Barbara. The hug was long and sincere. Thank you for saving our family, she murmured. You helped save our family, Mrs. Barbara, by accepting treatment, changing your life. I was so lost, but you found your way back. That evening during dinner, Mrs. Barbara shared some news. Kids, I have something to tell you. What is it, Mom? I met someone at the support group. Richard and Jennifer exchanged glances. What kind of person? Asked Jennifer. A gentleman named Anthony. He was also being treated for gambling addiction. And, well, we started meeting to talk, have coffee. Mom, are you dating? Asked Jennifer, smiling. Mrs. Barbara blushed. I don't know if you can call it dating. We're two elderly people who like each other. Richard smiled. Mrs. Barbara, that's wonderful. We're very happy for you. Really? You don't think it's strange? Why would we think it's strange? Asked Jennifer. Because, well, it's only been 2 years since I lost my husband. Mum, Dad would want you to be happy. You think so? I'm sure, said Richard. And when are we going to meet Anthony? He's coming to dinner here next Sunday, if you don't mind. Of course we don't mind, said Jennifer. The following Sunday, Anthony came to dinner at the house. He was a 70-year-old gentleman, a widower, who had lost almost everything to gambling before seeking treatment. Richard, Jennifer, he said during dinner, Barbara told me your whole story. I want you to know I really admire what you did. Thank you, Anthony, said Richard. And how is your treatment going? Very well. It's been 1.5 years since I last gambled, and meeting Barbara has given me even more reasons to stay clean. Mrs. Barbara smiled. We support each other. That's how it should be, said Jennifer. After dinner, Anthony pulled Richard aside for a private conversation. Richard, may I ask you a personal question? Of course. How were you able to forgive Barbara after everything she did? Richard thought for a moment. Anthony, I learned that addicted people do things they would never do under normal circumstances. The Barbara who manipulated my wife wasn't the real Barbara. She was a desperate and sick person. And that made forgiveness easier. It made it easier to understand the situation. Forgiveness was a choice I made out of love for my wife and the possibility of rebuilding our family. You didn't feel anger? I felt a lot of anger, but I realized that holding on to anger wasn't going to solve anything. Solving the problem would. Anthony nodded. Thank you for saving Barbara. She's a wonderful woman. She saved herself, Anthony. I just helped in the process. 3 years after the Electrician disguise episode, Richard was in his office when he received a special call. Richard, it's Dr. Sarah from the clinic where your mother-in-law was treated. Hi, Dr. Sarah, how are you? Well, thank you. Richard, I'm calling because I wanted to invite you to give a talk. What kind of talk? We're holding a conference on families and gambling addiction. We'd like you to share your experience. My experience? The way you handled your mother-in-law's situation. It's a very inspiring success story. Richard became thoughtful. I don't know if I'm the right person to talk about that. Richard, you've created an institute that has already helped hundreds of families. Your experience could inspire others. Let me talk to my wife and mother-in-law. If they agree, I'll accept. That evening, Richard told Jennifer and Mrs. Barbara about the invitation. I think you should accept, said Jennifer. I agree, Mrs. Barbara concurred. Our story could help other families. You don't mind having our lives exposed? Richard, said Mrs. Barbara, if our experience can prevent other families from going through what we did, I want you to tell our story, even the most embarrassing details. Even those. People need to know the reality of gambling addiction. 2 weeks later, Richard was on stage at the clinic's auditorium, facing about 200 people, including psychologists, family members of addicts, and former addicts. Good afternoon. My name is Richard Johnson, and I'm going to tell you how I discovered that my mother-in-law was selling furniture from my house to pay gambling debts. The audience fell silent. It all started when I noticed some objects from my house were disappearing. Richard told the whole story, from the first suspicions to the creation of the Fresh Start Institute. He didn't omit any embarrassing details, including the episode with the electrician disguise. The most important part of our story, he said, reaching the end of the lecture, is that gambling addiction doesn't just affect the addict, it affects the whole family. And recovery should include the whole family too. When he finished, the audience rose in applause. Several people approached to talk. "Mr. Richard," said one lady, "thank you for sharing your story. I'm going through the same situation with my husband. How can I help you? Could you give me your institute's contact information?" Richard handed her a card and spoke with the lady for a few minutes. Throughout the afternoon, dozens of people approached with similar stories. When he returned home, Richard was emotional. "How was the lecture?" asked Jennifer. "Very moving. I met several people who are going through the same situation we did." "And how did you feel telling our story?" "At first it was embarrassing, but then I saw that people related to it, that our experience was really helping." Mrs. Barbara approached. "Richard, thank you for telling our story with such respect." "What do you mean? You could have painted me as a villain, but you showed that I was a sick person who needed help." "Because that's exactly what it was, Mrs. Barbara." That evening, Richard was in the office organizing some things when Jennifer entered. "Honey, can I ask you a question?" "Always." "Do you regret disguising yourself as an electrician that day?" Richard laughed. "No. Why do you ask?" "Because it was kind of a radical move." "It was, but at the time I was desperate. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. And if you hadn't discovered anything that day, I probably would have tried other ways to find the truth." "But what if you hadn't succeeded?" Richard became thoughtful. "Jennifer, I love you very much. I wouldn't have given up on our family without a fight, even if I kept lying to you. Honey, I knew you were lying, but I also knew it wasn't out of malice. Something was forcing you to lie." "How did you know?" "Because I've known you for 10 years. I know when you're doing well and when you're suffering. And during that period you were clearly suffering." Jennifer hugged her husband. "I love you so much." "I love you too." "Richard?" "Yes?" "Do you think our story will have a happy ending?" Richard smiled. "Honey, our story already has a happy ending. We're together. Your mother is well. Our family is united, and we're still helping other families. What more could we want?" "That's true. Besides, Jennifer, our story isn't over. We still have many years ahead of us. Many years helping other people. Many years being happy, and helping other people be happy too." 5 years after the undercover episode, Richard was in the Fresh Start Institute office when he received an unexpected visit. "Richard?" said a familiar voice. Richard looked up and saw Victor, the former loan shark. "Victor, what a surprise. How are you?" "Well, thank you. May I sit?" Of course, of course." Victor sat down and remained silent for a few seconds. "Richard, I came here to tell you something." "What is it?" "I decided to quit the loan business." Richard was surprised. "Really?" "Yes. Our work together over the past few years made me think a lot about what I was doing with people's lives." "And what will you do now?" "I want to work with you, officially." "How so?" "I want to help at the Institute. I know the gambling world. I can identify people at risk. I can be useful." Richard became thoughtful. "Victor, that's a very big change in your life." "It is, but necessary. Richard, in the past 5 years, I've seen more families rebuilding themselves through the Institute than in 20 years watching families destroy themselves because of debts." "And financially, how will you support yourself?" "I've saved money over the years. I can work as a volunteer initially, and if it works out, maybe you can hire me." Richard smiled. "Victor, it would be an honor to have you on our team." That night, Richard shared the news with Jennifer and Mrs. Barbara. "The former loan shark wants to work at the Institute?" asked Jennifer, surprised. "He does, and I think it would be a very smart hire." "Why?" "Because he knows the gambling world better than any of us. He can help us identify serious cases and better understand the psychology of addicts." Mrs. Barbara became thoughtful. "Richard, may I give my opinion?" "Of course." "I think it would be a very beautiful way to close the cycle. The man who was once part of the problem becoming part of the solution." "Exactly what I thought. Besides," continued Mrs. Barbara, "he must be feeling guilty about everything he's done over the years. Working at the Institute could be a form of redemption for him." "Mrs. Barbara, you're becoming a psychologist," Richard joked. "It's the effect of treatment. You learn to better understand people's feelings." 6 months later, Victor was already a full member of the Fresh Start Institute team. His previous experience had proven invaluable in identifying complex cases and developing treatment strategies. "Richard," he said in a team meeting, "I've identified a case that might be complicated." "What's special about it?" "It's a family where the addict is a 16-year-old teenager. She's playing online and already owes a considerable amount." "How can a teenager owe money in online games?" "She used her parents' credit card without them knowing. The debt has already passed $100,000. "And the parents? They found out a few days ago. They're desperate. The girl threatened to hurt herself if they told anyone." Richard became worried. "This is indeed a complex case. We'll need psychologists specialized in teenagers. I've already contacted Dr. Sarah. She recommended a colleague who specifically works with young addicts." "Great. And is the family willing to accept help?" "They are. But the teenager is resisting. Let's schedule a meeting with the whole family, including the girl." The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Richard, Jennifer, and Victor welcomed the family at the Institute. "My name is Richard, this is my wife Jennifer, and this is Victor. We want to help you." The couple, Mr. John and Mrs. Mary, looked exhausted. Their daughter, Emily, was clearly irritated to be there. "Emily," said Richard, speaking directly to the teenager, "we know you don't want to be here." "I really don't. I don't need help. Do you think you can handle a $100,000 debt all by yourself?" Emily fell silent. "Emily," Richard continued, "can I tell you a story?" "What story?" "The story of how I found out my mother-in-law was selling furniture from my house to pay off gambling debts." Richard told the whole story to the family. Emily paid attention to every detail. "And what happened to your mother-in-law?" she asked at the end. "She got treatment, stopped gambling, and now she has a normal life. She's even dating. Did she really manage to quit?" "She did, but she needed professional help." Emily looked at her parents. "And if I accept help, you won't send me away or anything like that?" "Of course not, honey," said Mrs. Mary. "We just want you to be okay." "Emily," said Jennifer, "can I tell you a secret?" "What secret?" "When I found out my mom had a gambling problem, my first reaction was to deny that she needed help. I thought we could handle it on our own." "And did you?" "No. Actually, the situation only got worse. It was only when we accepted professional help that things started to get better." Emily grew thoughtful. "And if I can't stop gambling?" "Then we try other strategies," said Richard. "The important thing is to try." "Okay, I'll accept treatment." 2 years later, Emily had become one of the leading advocates for the Institute's program for teenage addicts. She often gave talks, sharing her experience with other young people. "Richard," she said at one of these talks, "thank you for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself. Emily, you saved yourself. We just offered the path, but you showed me that it was possible to stop gambling and have a normal life." That evening, Richard was at home having dinner with Jennifer and Mrs. Barbara when the phone rang. "Richard, it's Emily." "Hi, Emily, is everything okay?" "Everything's great." "Richard, can I tell you some news?" "Of course. I've decided I want to study psychology. I want to work with young people addicted to gambling." Richard smiled. "Emily, that's wonderful news. It's because of you. You inspired me to want to help others." "Emily, we were the ones inspired by you. Your recovery showed us that it's possible to help people of any age." After hanging up, Richard shared the news with Jennifer and Mrs. Barbara. "How beautiful," said Jennifer. "A young woman who almost destroyed herself because of addiction now wants to help other young people." "It's the cycle of good," said Mrs. Barbara. "People who were helped wanting to help others." "Exactly," Richard agreed. "That's what makes our work at the Institute so rewarding." That night, as they were getting ready for bed, Jennifer hugged Richard. "Honey, sometimes I think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't disguised yourself as an electrician that day." "What do you mean?" "Maybe we'd still be living a lie. Maybe my mum would still be sick. Maybe our family would have fallen apart. Or maybe we would have found another way to solve our problems." "Do you really believe that?" Richard thought for a moment. "Jennifer, I believe that people who truly love each other always find a way to overcome problems. Maybe not the way we did, but they find it. And if I had never told the truth, but you did. And that's what matters." "Richard?" "Yes?" "Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for letting me fight for us. Do you think we'll be together forever?" Richard smiled. "Jennifer, after everything we've been through together, I'm sure we can overcome anything. Anything at all. Anything. As long as we face our problems together, with honesty and love. So yes, we will be together forever." 10 years after the Electrician disguise episode, Richard was in the Fresh Start Institute office organizing files for the annual board meeting. In a decade, the Institute had helped over 1,000 families and become a national reference in treating gambling addiction. Jennifer entered the office carrying a box. "Honey, I brought the reports you asked for." "Thank you." "Jennifer, have you seen this year's numbers?" "I have. They're impressive. 1,200 families helped in 10 years, an 85% success rate, and now we have branches in 5 states. Richard, are you proud of what we've built?" "I'm proud of us, Jennifer, of what we built together, and of my mother, especially your mother." She turned her pain into purpose. Mrs. Barbara appeared at the office door. "May I come in?" "Of course, Mom," said Jennifer. "Richard, I came with some news." "What news?" "Anthony proposed to me." Richard and Jennifer were surprised. "Mum, that's wonderful," exclaimed Jennifer. "Congratulations, Mrs. Barbara," said Richard, hugging his mother-in-law. "Thank you, but I wanted to ask you something." "What?" "We'd like to have the wedding here at the Institute." "Here?" "Yes. This place represents new beginnings, hope, family. We couldn't think of a better place." Richard was moved. "Mrs. Barbara, it would be an honor. And Richard, I wanted to ask you one more thing." "What?" "I'd like you to walk me down the aisle." Richard felt his eyes well up. "Mrs. Barbara." "Richard, you saved my life, saved my family, gave me a second chance. It would mean so much to me if you were the one to give me away to Anthony." "Of course, Mrs. Barbara. It would be an honor." The wedding was scheduled for 2 months later. On the day of the ceremony, the Institute's hall was decorated with simple flowers, but there was an atmosphere of joy and renewal in the air. Richard, elegant in his dark suit, offered his arm to Mrs. Barbara, who was radiant in a light blue dress. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready. Richard, thank you for everything." "Mrs. Barbara, you're the one who taught us that it's always possible to start over." As they walked down the aisle toward the altar where Anthony was waiting, Richard thought about how life had been generous to them. All the important people in their lives were there. Jennifer, radiant as the maid of honor. Dorothy, moved in the front row. Victor, smiling proudly. Emily, now graduated in psychology and working at the Institute. Dozens of other people whose lives had been touched by the work they did. "Richard," murmured Mrs. Barbara as they walked, "do you think your late father-in-law would be proud?" "I'm sure he would, Mrs. Barbara. He would be very proud of the strong and courageous woman you've become." When they reached the altar, Anthony was visibly emotional. "Anthony," said Richard, placing Mrs. Barbara's hand in his, "take good care of this special woman." "Don't worry, Richard. Thank you for everything." The ceremony was simple and moving. When the pastor declared Anthony and Barbara husband and wife, the entire hall stood up applauding. At the reception, Richard gave a speech. "Mrs. Barbara, Anthony, dear friends, today we celebrate much more than a wedding. We celebrate proof that it's never too late to start over, never too late to love, never too late to be happy." The audience applauded. 10 years ago, our family went through a crisis that could have destroyed us. But we chose to fight. We chose to help each other. We chose love over resentment. Richard looked at Jennifer, who was crying with emotion. And today, seeing this celebration, seeing all the people whose lives have been transformed by the Fresh Start Institute, I realize there is no greater victory than turning pain into love, problems into solutions, despair into hope. "Richard," someone from the audience shouted, "tell the electrician story." Everyone laughed and applauded. "The electrician story has become a legend here at the Institute," said Richard, smiling. "But the real lesson from that story isn't the disguise I used. It's that true love gives us strength to fight for our family, even when everything seems lost." Mrs. Barbara approached the microphone. "May I say something?" "Of course, Mrs. Barbara." "Richard, Jennifer, I spent the first 70 years of my life thinking I knew what family was. But it was only in the last 10 years that I learned the true meaning of that word." She looked at the audience. "Family isn't just blood. Family is who stands by your side in the toughest moments. It's who forgives you when you make mistakes. It's who extends a hand when you fall. It's who believes in you when you don't even believe in yourself." Emotion filled the hall. "Richard," Mrs. Barbara continued, "you gave me a family when I had lost all hope. Thank you for not giving up on me." Richard approached and hugged his mother-in-law. "Mrs. Barbara, you gave us a stronger, more united family. We're the ones who thank you." The party continued late into the night. People shared stories, laughed, cried, celebrated. When they finally got home, Richard, Jennifer, and Dorothy, who had moved to her own apartment but still worked for them, sat in the living room to talk. "Richard," said Dorothy, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, Dorothy." "Did you ever regret disguising yourself as an electrician that day?" Richard laughed. "Dorothy, that was one of the most important days of my life." "Why?" "Because it was the day I decided to fight for my family. And every time someone decides to fight for love, something magical happens." "What happens?" "Love always wins." Jennifer snuggled against her husband's shoulder. "Richard, what do you think the future holds for us?" "I don't know, love, but I know we'll face it together." "And the Institute?" "The Institute will keep growing, helping more families, transforming more lives." "And us?" Richard kissed his wife's forehead. "We'll keep being happy, simply happy." Dorothy smiled. "Mr. Richard, your story is proof that it's worth believing in love." "Yes, Dorothy, and it's worth fighting for it." That night, as they were getting ready for bed, Jennifer hugged Richard. "Love, thank you for disguising yourself as an electrician 10 years ago." Richard laughed. "Why are you thanking me for that now?" "Because that day changed our lives forever, and changed them for the better." "Jennifer, do you know what makes me proudest about our story?" "What?" "It's not the Institute, not the 1,000 families we've helped, not the recognition we've received." "Then what is it?" "It's knowing that after everything we've been through, we're still capable of loving deeply, trusting completely, and dreaming together." "That's beautiful." "And it's true." Jennifer stayed silent for a few minutes. "Richard?" "Yes?" "I love you." "I love you too, Jennifer. Forever." And so 10 years after a man disguised himself as an electrician to discover what was happening in his own home, a family had not only survived the crisis, but transformed into a force of love and hope for hundreds of other families. The story of Richard and Jennifer became legend at the Fresh Start Institute. It was told to every new family that arrived, showing that no matter how difficult the situation, there's always hope when true love exists and willingness to fight. And every time someone asked Richard what the secret was to saving a family in crisis, he answered with the wisdom that only experience can teach. The secret isn't never having problems. The secret is facing problems together, with love, honesty, and lots of patience. And sometimes, when necessary, with the courage to disguise oneself as an electrician. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story of overcoming and family love. Do you believe that Richard made the right decision by confronting the situation instead of simply ignoring the signs? Leave your honest comment about how families can overcome seemingly impossible crises. We would love to read your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one.